Now that we've talked about all of the different considerations for gaining internal approval and executive approval for setting your science-based target, let's use Formula Pharma as an example to walk through it all together. So as a reminder, you can see here that Formula Pharma is a company that's committed to setting a science-based target, and throughout our time together, we've considered a lot of options for how they may proceed. Across the bottom of this screen, you can see that they ultimately decided to commit to reducing absolute Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions by 42% and Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions from purchased goods and services and upstream transportation and distribution by 51.6% per ton of product by 2030 from a 2021 base year. They are a pharma, biotech, and life sciences company with a number of different within their portfolio, including primarily innovative drugs around respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. They have defined and established this target that they want to set, and they will plan to set sub-targets and KPIs across each of their relevant business units. This can support them in gaining internal approval and buy-in and operationalizing their target. The first thing they'll need to do is engage with their leadership team to achieve internal sign-off. So on this next screen, you can see the organization chart for where their sustainability team who's proposing this target will sit, and how that rolls up into their own organization. As you can see, the sustainability team reports up to the executive leadership team, who's critical for internal target approval and ultimately the authority to proceed with setting their target. They have identified key teams that will be critical partners as they seek to obtain internal approvals and actually make action towards their target. These are their procurement teams and their facilities management teams. These are two stakeholder groups that are often critical stakeholders for the development, progress, and achievement of targets, and they may be relevant for your organization as well. The procurement team will be focused on Scope 3 emissions. This team is responsible for determining what materials get purchased and choosing the suppliers that they partner with. They are critical for Scope 3 supply chain emissions activities, and they probably have the best information about how to reduce those emissions. For the facilities management team, they'll be responsible for the management of operational facilities, and that's very closely tied to Scope 1 and 2 emissions for Formula Pharma, as well as many other companies. This team will be responsible for implementing energy efficiency measures and improving operational practices across their facilities, as well as implementing projects like on-site solar or any other solutions to reduce Scope 1 and 2 emissions. Now let's talk about their interest from their executive teams and how they're building that business case. So throughout conversations with their leadership team, the sustainability team learned of a few concepts that they would like to understand and that could help them approve the target. Really, there's three key concepts behind the science-based target that they need to know about before giving that final sign-off and approval for the target. The first thing the Formula Pharma leadership team is interested in understanding is how they can achieve the reductions required to meet the target. They'd like to know what actions they need to put in place and how much those projects are going to cost to meet the target. You can see here that we have an illustrative roadmap that can help them lay that out. The second thing they'd like to understand are the risks and benefits of setting the target and how it could potentially impact their business long term. In addition to those kind of internal considerations, Formula Farmers leadership wants to know what their peers are doing and how their climate action compares to those. They want to know if setting a science-based target would make them a leader in the industry or if they're somewhere in the middle. So Formula Pharma's sustainability, procurement, and facilities teams can work together to build out a storyline to answer these questions, which you can see across this gray box here. The first on the left is a waterfall chart that highlights the abatement pathway for Formula Pharma to achieve their target. I'd like to note that setting and achieving a target is a long-term process, and as you set targets out past 2030, maybe to 2040 or 2050, these abatement pathways will change, especially as Formula Pharma begins to implement the abatement measures. But in this near term, it's really important to define the focus areas that they could consider for achieving that target. Second, the sustainability team has created a bulleted list to satisfy the requests regarding risks and benefits. They've noted that the first benefit is increased sustainability ratings that they can report to ESG rating agencies like CDP, MSCI, or Sustainalytics. They can be a proactive leader and begin transitioning to a decarbonized world and economy in alignment with kind of what everyone else is doing. They will be less exposed to future climate regulations, which can be very valuable, especially with the increase in those climate regulations that you've already learned about earlier in this course. Lastly, they feel that setting a science-based target would give them a competitive advantage over their peers, and some of their customers may be more interested in partnering with them because of their climate commitments and efforts. On the alternative, there are some risks of not meeting a public target, of increasing the requirements and the impacts associated with their supply chain partners, because they would need to rely on those partners. Not setting a target would run the risk of not complying with those emerging regulations. The last thing that the Formula Pharma leadership team wanted to know was what their peers are doing, and so Formula Pharma has put together a peer benchmarking table. The Formula Pharma team utilized public research to understand their peers around and what they're doing around setting targets. And from doing so, they can really understand and benchmark themselves across the typical targets that are seen in their industry. And we tend to find that having these peer benchmarking examples are a critical factor for executive teams, especially because so many life sciences and healthcare companies are setting science-based targets. It's a really great story to show that setting this target really puts you with the rest of the pack. Once they have this business case defined and presenting all of this information to their leadership teams, they've been able to gain executive buy-in and now want to focus on operationalizing that target. So Formula Pharma's target will be approved at the company level, where they're committing to reducing emissions across scopes 1, 2, and 3. But they need to work towards breaking up and separating out those emission reductions that would be required across the different business divisions and business units, which you can see here. They've decided to do so based on regionality, and so they've primarily broken down their target between the Americas division and the Asia division, where 20% of emissions can really come from those Americas and the remainder from their operations and facilities located across Asia. Once they have that breakdown of the responsibilities within the geographical distribution, they can then look at the different business units in each of those regions to break down the target further and see who can support achievement of those targets. You can see here that those business units are defined as procurement, facilities, packaging, et cetera, and any other part of your business for Formula Pharma could come together so that each small business unit has ownership and responsibility for making progress, and they can be responsible for developing an action plan, and the sustainability team can help them with that so that they can achieve that target. So that's just an example of how Formula Pharma would go through the process of gaining executive approval and then operationalizing the target through looking at these smaller teams.